Canada is joining its allies by providing battle tanks to help Ukrainian forces fight off Russia's invasion. Here's where the numbers stand at this point. The United States will send Ukraine 31 tanks. Germany, Poland, and the UK are sending 14 tanks each. And Canada announced today it will send 4. Several other European nations have signaled they will send tanks, but have yet to confirm numbers. Here to discuss Canada's commitment is Anita Anand, Minister of National Defence. Minister, thank you very much for speaking with us. I'd like to start by asking you, how did you get to the number 4 Leopard 2 tanks?
Well, thanks for having me on. It's great to talk to you again. Since we have received the request from Ukraine, from Minister Resnikov and then President Zelensky at the Ramstein meeting directly where he video conferenced in, we have been assessing our own inventory and ensuring that we can put forward a certain number of tanks as soon as possible. And so the number 4 that I announced today was arrived at in terms of what else we need to ensure we have that capability for. For example, the defense of our own country. For example, the need to ensure that we can train our own Canadian Armed Forces on this machinery, and then finally, to make sure that we are able to live up to our commitments to NATO and in particular Operation Reassurance. But as I said today, 4 is the starting point. We are still evaluating all of those factors I just outlined, and we're also meeting and discussing this issue with our allies. In fact, I just got off a call with Germany and other partner countries to discuss the importance of interoperability and the issue of spare parts and training in particular. And as we work through those issues, as well as the factors that I outlined at the beginning, we may well get to a point where we are able to commit additional tanks. But we have to be prudent about what we need in the Canadian Armed Forces and at the same time continue to show solidarity with Ukraine and the Ukrainian Armed Forces. You'll have to recall that we've put on the table over $1 billion of military aid, and in the last few weeks alone, an air defense system, 200 armored vehicles, and today 4 tanks, Leopard tanks. So we're very committed and will continue to engage at this level with our allies, with our partners, and of course with Ukraine.
So when you talk about spare parts and your consideration there, is the correct understanding that before Canada sends any other tanks, they require spare parts, they require fixing before they can go over? Is that the issue?
There are a number of important considerations relating to maintenance and serviceability, and spare parts falls smack dab in the center of those considerations. And we have to remember that a tank is a very complex piece of equipment. It is not like an oil change in a car, for example. Fixing a tank requires a continued supply of spare parts, and certainly acquiring those spare parts is part of the calculation to ensure that we have serviceability of the entire fleet of 82, and certainly we don't want to send any equipment to Ukraine that isn't going to be usable in the long term. And so spare parts on a continuous basis are going to be important, and certainly that's what I discussed with our fellow partners who are also considering tank donations this afternoon.
So when you talk about that, the entire fleet, 82 combat tanks, when Canada comes forward to say, okay, at this moment we can spare 4 of these, we can contribute 4 of these, it leaves the impression that the rest of the Canadian fleet of these tanks are not in good enough shape. They're not in working condition. What is the condition of the remaining tanks?
They are at various stages of serviceability. That's the first point. But the second point, and it's extremely important, is to recognize that there are a number of obligations that the Canadian Armed Forces need to consider in terms of arriving at a number of tanks to send. The need to ensure that we have the expertise, the ability to train our own Canadian Armed Forces on this equipment. The need to ensure that we have the capabilities in our country in case defense of the homeland is ever necessary. That's our first priority always. And finally, the need to ensure that we are able to live up to our Operation Reassurance commitments But I will say that the Canadian Armed Forces have expertise in training generally. And that's why I want to stress that we're not just sending 4 tanks. We are also sending trainers. We are also sending munitions. We are also sending spare parts. And the training portion of this equation is extremely important. Inside a tank, you have a gunner, you have a driver, you have a loader, you have a crew commander, and we need to make sure there's a maintainer or mechanic at all times. And so we're going to provide the training to the Ukrainian armed forces in a third country with respect to all of those aspects of tank operability. And that's a crucial point, Katie.
Do you have a firm number of the number of tanks that are not operational in Canada?
This is a continually important point for us to continue to maintain these tanks. And I want to thank all the Canadian Armed Forces members who provide incredible dedication to the continued maintenance of our tanks.
But do we have enough? Is there a number and is there a concern? The thing I'm trying to get at here is Canadians might be listening to this and wondering, you talk about making sure that Canada is prepared for any sort of defense of the homeland, any sort of threat that may come here. And the concern is, do we have the equipment that's necessary? Is there a firm number of the tanks that aren't working? And what happens to acquire tanks so that Canada is prepared?
So let's stand back and remember that there are multiple different types of tanks. We have 42 2A4 tanks. We have 20 2A4M tanks. We have 20 other 2A6M tanks.
And how many of them are working? How many of them are operational? How many of them work or need repairs?
My point is that each of these different types of tanks require servicing, require spare parts, and we are constantly acquiring the necessities for the continued maintenance of the tanks as a whole. I also want to stress our defense policy update, because as we provide capabilities to Ukraine and as we need additional newer technologies, we are going to be examining those questions in our upcoming defense policy update so that the Canadian Armed Forces are continually well equipped and well served.
How would you describe Canada's combat readiness in this moment?
Canada's combat readiness is a continually point of focus for the Chief of Defense Staff and me. As I said, the defense policy update is going to build on.
But how would you describe it? How would you describe it? How would you describe it?
I'm describing that as we continue to participate in international operations like Operation Reassurance, like Operation Projection, like fulfilling our Indo-Pacific strategy, as well as domestic operations, as you saw in Hurricane Fiona, we need to continually build up and reassess what is needed to ensure our Canadian Armed Forces have what they need to defend and protect Canada and participate in our international and multilateral alliances. So this is a moving question, will continue to be there for the Canadian Armed Forces to provide what is needed domestically and internationally.
Is this the moment to push the finance minister to increase defense spending in line with the NATO target of 2% of GDP?
This is the moment for us to make sure we have a defense policy update that best reflects the needs and capabilities of the Canadian Armed Forces, not just now, but into the future. We are seeing defense spending rising by 70% between the years of 2017 and 2026. We saw $8 billion in addition to that in the last federal budget. And we are also making sure that we are doing whatever is necessary to build a Canadian Armed Forces that is durable, where all members feel protected and respected, and where we have the capabilities necessary for our domestic and international operations. So those are the types of things that I will continue to be focused on. And our government, of course, is on an upward trajectory with regards to defense spending generally.
About the 2% target?
As we discussed last week, Katie, we're very much committed to continually providing the necessities of capacity for the Canadian Armed Forces to be able to protect the homeland and to participate in our international obligations. We have the 5th largest defense budget of NATO countries. And as I mentioned, we are a leader in Latvia of the Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group, which is, as we committed to last year, moving to brigade level. All of that to say that there is much work going on in terms of our continued commitment, not only to Ukraine, as you saw today with the donation of tanks, but also with a larger NATO alliance.
Minister, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Katie. Take good care.
To get reaction from the opposition, we are now joined by Shelby Cramp-Newman, who is the Conservative Deputy Defence Critic, and Lindsay Matheson, who is the NDP Defence Critic. Thank you both for joining us. Ms. Cramp-Newman, I'll start with you. What is your reaction to today's announcement about 4 tanks?
Well, there's no question. We certainly support our allies who are donating the tanks to Ukraine, and we're supporting the government, to be included in the effort, despite it's kind of a sad contribution. In its entirety, I'm really disappointed in the disrepair of our military, and I think this is a symbol of our weak state of our military.
Okay, and before I go on to Ms. Matheson, though, the weak state of the military, why do you think that is, and why do you think that this contribution it doesn't meet the standard you'd like it to see?
Well, the small number that we have to spare, I think, is just another sign that our military, it's in a state of repair after 8 years of Trudeau's government of basically gutting our military. So there's no plan or reassurance that the new tanks or any new tanks or equipment are being procured anytime soon to replace what we're sending. So that's my concern.
Well, here's the thing, though. I will point out that, yes, Canada has not met defense spending targets by NATO allies under Justin Trudeau, but there was previous underfunding by the previous Conservative government. You do recognize that, correct? That this is a problem that's been going on for decades.
No, I certainly do. And we support our NATO allies in principle. But we have to recognize that it's exceedingly difficult. We have to understand that Justin Trudeau has marked out spending and maxed out spending everywhere else. So,
but the previous Conservative,
everywhere else, but not defense.
The previous Conservative government, though, did underspend when it came to defense spending. Though you do recognize that this is an ongoing challenge for governments of multiple stripes.
But I also recognize that Conservatives, we stand up, and we need to continue to stand up for our men and women in uniform, and ensuring that they continue to have the ultimate max equipment to protect our country moving forward.
Ms. Matheson, can I get your reaction to today's announcement about 4 tanks?
Well, absolutely. We need to do everything that we can, everything in our power to ensure that we're helping Ukraine in the ways that they've asked for. This country has shown that dedication to ensuring that Ukrainians can defend themselves and defend their democratic rights. We do support as well the sending of the tanks. My concern, of course, is that they're getting them as quickly as possible. We saw quite a delay in terms of the LAVs that were promised and took quite a while to send, and so all of the logistics around there is complicated. But there again is so much that we need to do that Canada can excel at in ways that we haven't fulfilled the promises that we've made. And you've pointed out quite rightly that several governments over many years have made many promises. They say all the right things, whether it's procurement or support on the ground. This government in particular has said that they will support in terms of humanitarian aid, in terms of refugees, in terms of sanctions, and we haven't been as strong on that as we need to. So that's where we will continue to push as well for support for Ukrainians.
Ms. Matheson, this is going to be a very difficult economic year. We already know that Canada's expecting to live through a recession, and it's going to mean that the federal government's going to have less money to be working with. Do you think now is the time, even though that is going to be the big picture financial forecast here, do you think now is the time for Canada to step up its defense spending and meet that 2% of GDP target that NATO allies strive for?
So the 2% has always been this number that's been in the air, and there's a lot of talk about what that means and all of the how you account for that. I don't ever want to get into those sort of nitty gritty when we're talking about people on the ground, people who need support. But there's also been the point that I believe the PBO made and showed very clearly that for defense spending, the department hasn't actually been able to spend what they've been given either. And so there's a lot to look at here. And in terms of supporting our own men and women, we need to ensure that they have safe, amazing equipment, the supports that they need on housing, on healthcare. I mean, you name it. So there's a lot to look at in terms of that spending and what that means.
So, Ms. Matheson, you're not a hard target on the 2%, but Ms. Cramp-Newman, what about you? Do you think now is the time for Canada to meet that 2% target?
I think the best thing that I would like to contribute is that bottom line, we're talking about Ukraine and the necessity that Ukraine has to win this war. And as Canadians, we should do absolutely everything that we can to support Ukraine. The fight for freedom, the fight for democracy, the fight for sovereign territory is paramount. And at this point today, we're talking about the support for the tanks going across, and there's no question. We have our support. We're lending our support. We're just questioning why it's taken so long. Since March of 2022, we've been calling on the government to donate Canadian Army's soon to be commissioned and soon to be replaced fleet of the Bisons, the Coyotes, and the Tracklaws. So there's over 300 of them that will be retired shortly and could also be donated to the Ukrainian military.
Ms. Cramp-Newman, do you think that in addition to, it's a very clear thing here that the Liberals, Conservatives, and the NDP, there is the political will there to make sure that Canada is a strong ally of Ukraine. Canada is doing what it can, whether it's humanitarian aid, military support. Everyone is behind this because this is something that everyone is in agreement on. But I'm curious as to, Ms. Cramp-Newman, what do you envision Canada's next step here? What do you want Canadians or the Canadian government to be thinking about next in terms of next steps and how Canada might help?
Well, I think there's a plethora of things that Canadians and Canadian military has to be mindful of right now. But again and again, it's exceedingly difficult when we're in a troubled time in Canada, and there's a lot of money going a lot of different directions. So I think it's really prudent of the government to make some decisions, sit down, and think, okay, it's important for us to support other countries, but we also have to have the real concern, and I appreciate the real concern is where does it leave us? And we want to ensure that our current government is supporting our Canadian military.
Do you have concerns about Canada's combat readiness in general?
Overall, I think we need to always be thinking about preparedness, and it needs to be certainly a paramount concern.
Ms. Matheson, I'll put that same question to you. Do you have concerns? Does the NDP have concerns about, if Canada is going to send more tanks to Ukraine and continue with contributions at the military level, that Canada's own military, that there might be concerns that, it might deplete things in a way that is not that is substandard?
Well, I think that this is a perfect opportunity for us to do that deep dive, as we've discussed before, just about that long-term procurement strategy that government after government, whether it's Liberal or Conservative, haven't really paid attention to, and they haven't given the right focus on it. They haven't come up with the solutions that are needed. Canada is in a very unique role, and I think that this is the case where we are all united. We all know that we need to support Ukraine and Ukrainians in how they deal with this illegal invasion. And there's a lot that we need to do on the ground for our own men and women. As I mentioned before, I mean, even things like housing, healthcare, their own supports. We heard from Justice O'Rourke at the end of last year on all of the things that we need to do. And so there's really quite a time that we need to look at everything. Everything needs to be on the table.
All right. I would like to thank both of you, Shelby Cramp-Newman and Lindsay Matheson. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much.